My name is Barry Schwartz. I'm a trustee here at Kenyon College, and I'm the board chair this year at Kenyon College. And it's my pleasure to introduce a fellow trustee, Matt Winkler, at this program tonight, which is the inaugural lecture to establish a digital library of a critical piece of what makes Kenyon unique. That critical piece, of course, is truly great teachers. And we have at least two here tonight to speak to you, and I suspect there are some others in the audience. Teachers who touch students' lives, teachers who change students' lives. Two of them are with us tonight. As a foreword to this first book in our digital library of great teaching at Kenyon, I want to say on behalf of the board a thank you to Matt Winkler. It was his inspiration, his vision to preserve what is truly unique about Kenyon that causes us to be here tonight. It's an example of trustee leadership at its best, and your colleagues on the board, Matt, thank you. For those of you who don't know, Matt Winkler is the editor-in-chief and co-founder of Bloomberg News. Before that, he was a reporter for the Mount Vernon News. And before that, he was an editor of the Collegian. Matt is a graduate of the class of 1977. He became a trustee in 2006. And most importantly to me, he is my friend. Ladies and gentlemen, Matt Winkler.
Thank you, Barry, for such kind remarks and granting me the privilege to be here. Madam President, fellow trustees, members of the faculty, students and friends of Kenyon here and at large. This is a wonderful moment in the history of Kenyon, and I'm honored to share it with you. 39 years ago, on a Thursday, not unlike today, I was sitting in Ross Hall, and Professor Peter Rutkoff bounded up the stage and declared he was Jacques Babeuf, a figure of the 18th century who during the ensuing weeks would reveal everything said and done from the so-called history below, including the perspective of Georges Lefebvre, the peasants of the North during the French Revolution. 2 hours later, I was across the lawn in Ascension's Philo-Mathesian Hall, where Will Scott was just beginning his survey of Southern history with required reading of Cavalier and Yankee by William Taylor, The Mind of the South by W.J. Cash, and The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner. To me, those days are permanent and exceptional because of the teachers who made them so. And here's hoping my peers at the time at colleges like Kenyon can share similar anecdotes about their liberal arts education. As the ensuing years have proved, the lives of Rutkoff and Scott outside the classroom took them far beyond the noted scholars they carefully explicated in the curriculum. And that is why we are here tonight. I'm a trustee now, obligated with obvious responsibilities to make sure no harm comes to Kenyon and to feed its insatiable appetite for financial resources. I think we trustees, though, have another obligation that may be far more important: to sponsor and promote what is unique to Kenyon. For Kenyon to prosper, it must be appreciated for what is special about Kenyon. By 2001, Scott and Rutkoff had collaborated on New York Modern, the arts in the city, which I think, if I might say so, is about the best book on the year I was born as the pinnacle of culture in 20th century America in my hometown. 9 years later, Rutkoff and Scott produced Fly Away, which shows how the culture that is exceptional to America is the culture derived from the slaves of Western Africa who, after enduring unspeakable deprivation and abuse, remained inspired by their faith, which enriched their emerging community in the New World to the point that after they escaped the Jim Crow South to cities across America, it can be said what is most globally appealing about America comes from this African migration to urban America. So here we are, two long-standing members of the Kenyon community who are obviously unique, whose scholarship has yet to be replicated, and now tonight, for the first time on a Kenyon stage, live and forever digital, we have what is unique to Kenyon. And I can say with confidence, there is a lot more where Peter Rutkoff and Will Scott come from, because as exceptional as they are, and they have spoken to me silently in all my years after living here, they are avatars of a community that is full of achievements unique to Kenyon. This is just the beginning of Kenyon Unique. So let's get on with it. Professors Scott and Rutkoff, the night is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Can you hear me? I have one of these hidden microphones. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Barry. Thank you, Georgia. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, my majors, all four of you who showed up. Thank you, Hayes, who was in the very first class that this all started with. The title of this lecture is "To Know There, You Gotta Go There," and that's Gullah. And it says pretty much what you heard it say: to know there, you have to go there. And that's a quote from Zora Neale Hurston, a book she wrote called Mules and Men, which is a kind of primer of cultural anthropology. And we took that phrase and translated it into Gullah to be the title for this talk. There are lots of other people that need to be thanked as well. President Rob O'Dean, who provided initial funding for what became North by South, the National Endowment for the Humanities, whose treasury we milked many times, the Department of Education, where we did even more serious damage. But most of all, this is a story of collaboration. Will and I have been friends since the morning in February in my first year here, when he showed up on my doorstep with his car run out of gas and was trying to get an interview at Kenyon, and we went to Dorothy's lunch at about 10 in the morning and celebrated that event well. We've been friends ever since. We've been teaching and working and collaborating together for all of this time. It's an unusual partnership. But the partnership has other flowers on the vine, and they include 10 years of teaching a course called North by South, and some of those folks who were in that first course, like Hayes, are here, where we traveled with students to places in the South and in the North to begin to understand African American culture. It includes the relationship we've been developing over all these years with teachers in what is what's called the CAP program. Most of these teachers then came with us to the South in other events, and we've trained them to look at African American culture through the eyes of a cultural perspective. And finally, to some wonderful people in South Carolina itself, and the names won't mean anything to you except one, but you can't give this kind of talk without that acknowledgement. We couldn't have done this without local people on St. Helena Island opening doors which were ordinarily closed really tight to anybody who was an outsider. And those guides are really, really important to what Will and I have done. And finally, to this amazing woman named Elsie Mollison, whose photograph is so beautifully depicted here. And Elsie is one of the first interviews we did that's now part of what's called the Gullah Digital Archive. And that's really, I hope, one of the things we're actually trying to talk about. The Gullah Digital Archive, well, I'll let Will introduce a little bit more of that later on. We're trying to create a record of a culture that's on the edge of extinction. And the collection now will be about 250 hours of video, and it's really a wonderful thing to be participating in. Anyway, thank you all for coming. Thank you, the leadership of the college. Oh, thank you, Nina, who came down and helped us interview. Thanks to everybody. Will, it's all yours.
I'm not sure it's because we're so isolated and lonely, but collaboration really is at the heart of what Kenyon is, at every level. Matt was talking about collaboration between faculty and students, and that's certainly wonderful, and it's what I feel and participate in. But when Matt was editing the Collegian, he trained, or at least opened the door, for 2 Pulitzer Prize-winning political cartoonists. And so there is student collaboration, taking the resources of the college, taking the opportunities of the college, and taking the incredible talent that we have in our student body and demonstrating that it's at least as good as the best in the world. So that's what this is all about. Our project is really about this place. This is on the, I guess, the south end, the southwest end of Sullivan's Island, which is probably, it's the most expensive place to buy a lot in the world today. It's amazing. I grew up there, and my wife's family grew up there, and you could get a house then for under $3,000, and now you can't get one for under $3 million. But in 1715, the English African Royal Company started landing slaves in Charleston, in the harbor, coming in Charleston Harbor, landing them on Sullivan's Island, which served as a pest island, a kind of Ellis Island, where they would stay for about 12 weeks. They would figure out whether they had communicable diseases, and then they would pass a physical test, and then they would be taken across the harbor and sold as slaves in Charleston. 40% of the Africans who came to North America before the international slave trade was ended entered through Charleston. And their first process, the first things that happened in the New World was that they formed a culture of their own that was Gullah. And so these people came from West Africa, if you know, right up here. Right in here is the Gold Coast, the Rice Coast, but the Slave Coast, where European countries established fortresses, and native people would capture other native people, bring them to these forts, and then sell them to the slave ships, and they would bring them to Brazil, the Caribbean, and to Virginia and South Carolina. And of the 400,000 slaves who came to North America, 40% came to South Carolina. Now, what this is, much more than a very beautiful scene, is that this is also where African American culture began. This is absolutely the Plymouth Rock of African America. There are no rocks on Sullivan's Island, but nonetheless, it serves the same purpose. About 180,000 people landed here. They were sold as slaves on the Charleston docks. And then, and this is what was important, they were taken to the rice lands, which is about 100 miles up the coast and 100 miles down the coast, and in an area that only goes in about 15 miles from the sea. It's called Low Country, Carolina, and Georgia. And this was an area where West Africans brought their technology from West Africa and their rice seeds from West Africa and their skills as rice agriculturalists and created the most prosperous agriculture in the world. By the time of the Revolution, the city of Charleston, which was half slaves, had the highest per capita income in the world, and almost anybody who was white would be a millionaire in our terms, that is, made wealthy by these West Africans' labor. Now, what happened in the rice lands, I think, and I think we both think, is what's really important. They came from West Africa not as a people, but as scores of people. They had different religions, they had different ethnicities, they had different languages, because West Africa never had a phenomena like the Roman Empire that would centralize things or homogenize them, nor Christianity. So West Africa is a very diverse place, one of the most diverse places in the world. I mean, you can look at Europe and you look at a map and you see all those funny little flags all over Europe. You look at North America and you see 3. You go to West Africa and you see just as many flags as you would looking at West Europe. So it's a very, very diverse place. And that was the genius. That is, they came to here, they were sold as slaves, and they went to the rice lands, but they couldn't understand each other. They didn't share each other's gods. They were physically looked different from one another, and when they were in West Africa, they probably were each other's mortal enemies. But like what happened to Euro-Americans when they came to Boston and New York and Philadelphia and Baltimore, these people were clustered together in these rice lands, and a process that we call the melting pot took place. This is the African melting pot, and it's just as important and just as rich as the one that we associate Ellis Island with. So they came to the rice lands, and the trick of the rice lands is, and if you've ever been to Charleston, you will pick this up right away, there are a damn lot of mosquitoes. I mean, there are more mosquitoes than there are grains of sand sometimes, it seems like. I mean, you just can't even come. But worse, these were malarial mosquitoes. So, if you were white and European and had never come from a place that had endemic malaria, you would go out there, get bitten by a mosquito, slap your shoulder, kill 500, and in about 3 days come down with malaria, and in 5 days they would bury you. So if you were out of Charleston and didn't have screens on your windows, in the rice lands, if you were of European background, you simply couldn't live there. But these slaves, these Africans from West Africa, came from the part of Africa, the Gold Coast, the rice lands, that was malarial. So they brought with them a immunity, a limited immunity, an acquired immunity from malaria, and in time they picked up one for yellow fever as well. So they could go to the rice lands of Carolina, and while all the whites were dying, they could hoe the rice, they could harvest the rice, they could mill the rice, and then in the middle of the day they could go home and do what the heck they wanted to, and the man was in Charleston. So, just like you, when the faculty's not around, you're eat, drinking, and being merry. Well, that's what happened. And part of the merriness was sexual intercourse, of course. And so all of these people who had been from 2 or 3 dozen different nationalities, I think we could call them, became one people and worked out a language that was part English, part all kinds of West African language, and the pidgin of the slave trade. And within 2 generations, women who spoke Gullah bore children who spoke Gullah. And when you have that second, if you're born to a person, if your mother speaks it, it's called a language. This Gullah language is what bonded them in the Low Country. And so when the man showed up with his lackeys, they would start speaking Gullah. And the man would say, "What in the hell?" And so he would say, "Well, do this, do this, do this." And they would be listening to them, and they would hear every word they said in English. But then when they asked them to do something, they say, "No sprechen die English." Only no Gullah, and nobody can understand it except other Gullah. So this gave them a verbal shield that separated them from the power that undergirded slavery. And because they're in the rice lands most of the year without any whites being around, it gave them an opportunity to create their own world and their own culture, which they did. Sometimes there would be a planter who would stay there for a while in the winter and have them go to church, and they were trying to make them Episcopalians, which is clearly a bad thing to do. If God had intended to be Episcopalians, he would have created a lot more of you, right? Okay. Well, they understood this from the day one. Okay? So they would go and they would do whatever they were told to do on Sunday, get out of church, and then they would go into the woods, and they would have brush arbors there, or later on, praise houses, in which they would worship the way they had worshiped back home, except that it was an amalgam of everything they had done at home. So you could take their religion and go to West Africa, and people would say, "I don't know what that is, and I don't know what they're speaking." But in the rice lands, everybody from Savannah, Georgia to Wilmington, North Carolina, or really from Jacksonville, Florida, to Wilmington, North Carolina, would understand, share the same beliefs, the same practices, speak the same language. And so these praise houses, which is where their religious life was created, out of sight of whites, became a New World form of Christianity. They were Christians really fairly quickly. They didn't have any trouble absorbing aspects of Christianity. But it's a highly spiritualized Christianity. And if you've seen or know much about Southern religion, you'll find that a lot of whites and almost all blacks worship a religion where the Holy Ghost is the center of the theology. And church is when you can sing good enough music with powerful enough rhythms for a long enough time, sometimes it takes 3 or 4 hours, you wait for the Holy Ghost to come. And when the Holy Ghost comes, you're visited by the Spirit, you speak in tongues, you sometimes faint, but what it's called is you're having church. Until the Holy Spirit arrives, you haven't had church. Okay? This is exactly what James Brown did at the Apollo Theater. He would sing, and his flames would sing, and at the end of 3 hours, they had had church, and he told them they had had church, and then he got up early the next morning and then went to church. There was no difference between his music and his religion, which today we'd probably call Pentecostal. So this is what happened here. And because it's so many of the slaves that come here, when they move westward, they take it with them and adjust to wherever they are, but at the heart of it is this spiritualized belief and language that's West African. And one of the nice things about this religion, and I particularly appreciate it because I grew up as Presbyterian, it's guilt-free. You go to church and you're supposed to find joy and express joy and express it with other people and come out of the church service glowing with spiritual ecstasy, so much that you can put up with all the crap you're going to get the rest of the week. And so you look forward to Saturday night and go to the juke joint, then you get up in the morning and you go to church, and it makes it possible to live in this incredibly racially oppressive world they did without damaging you and not taking away all the good things that make you. So the way it was transmitted is in the praise house and through what's the dance? Huh?
The shout.
Not the shout.
The ring shout.
The ring shout. I came here when Matt came here, and short-term memory is getting to be a problem. Ring shout, which was taken all the way to Texas and beyond, but in the ring shout, it's a dance, and it's a spiritualized sacred dance, is where the fundamentals of this culture was preserved, and it's what they would take to Chicago, to Cleveland, to Harlem, to Los Angeles. In some ways, that ring shout was there, and what we call R&B and rock and roll is a direct descendant of this. Okay, I'm done. Peter is saying, not again.
The string of islands that goes from Wilmington to Jacksonville, the Sea Islands, are isolated and were isolated from the mainland until the early 20th century, which meant that all the things that Will has been describing to you had a kind of incubator in which to develop relatively isolated from mainline, mainstream, white and European culture. In other words, in the Sea Islands, there's the leftover of West African customs and styles and religion and music and dance that doesn't exist anywhere else. And so Gullah culture, which is the repository of this West Africanized culture, is one of the things we got very, very interested in, and it's the start of North by South. What we've done over the last several years is gone to one place, and that place is called St. Helena Island. And this is the general area called Port Royal, and Port Royal is there. The town of Beaufort is over here, and this place that some of you may have heard of, Hilton Head, is over there. St. Helena Island has the last 3 pray houses left in all of the islands. And that's where we decided we needed to go and take our teachers, and we'll tell you a little bit more about this in a couple of minutes. St. Helena Island is maybe 64 square miles. It didn't have a connecting bridge until 1910. If you've seen a film called Daughters of the Dust, it takes place more or less on this island. And St. Helena Island, therefore, is the bearer not just of Gullah culture, but of a very particular way that that culture was preserved. And that's a couple of minutes I wanted to talk to you about. As soon as the South seceded and Fort Sumter was breached, the Union Navy occupied the whole region. And in response, all the white plantation owners scrammed. And that left thousands of now not free but not slaved, previously enslaved, West African, African Americans sitting on the property of their previous owners. Over the course of the next couple of years, a couple of really interesting things happened. The abolitionists in the North came to St. Helena Island and built a Quaker school called Penn Center. And the idea was that they could demonstrate to the rest of the world that these ex-slaves were as capable as anybody else of cultivating, not literally cultivating, an agricultural living for themselves, but then be taught to read, to write, and to become citizens as equal to whites. And it was called the Port Royal Experiment. The Penn Center is the place where we now go to work and gain access to the praise houses and the Gullah who are still living there. St. Helena Island is the last bastion of Gullah culture. There are probably 3 Gullah people on Hilton Head. And they tend the golf courses. But virtually everybody on St. Helena who's Gullah owns their property. And that's what's important to understand. This occurred because when the Emancipation Proclamation was read on New Year's Day, 1863, the Gullah of St. Helena gathered literally by this tree, which is called Emancipation Tree. And the Union Army read out the Emancipation Proclamation, even though it didn't apply to them. It was understood to apply to them. And they embraced their freedom. So they're on the land. The whites are still off somewhere else. The whites have reneged on their taxes. And so the government says, hey, this is your property. Farm it as you will. 2 years later, Sherman leads this mass of an army from Atlanta to the coast, and every mile he goes, another couple of hundred and then a couple of thousand freed slaves join up, and he gets to St. Helena. He said, how am I going to get rid of all these people? And he issues what's called Field Order 15. And Field Order 15 legitimates, in effect, the squatters' rights of the people who had been living on the land. In other words, 40 acres and a mule. And this is the only place in African America where that Reconstructionist, abolitionist goal of 40 acres and a mule was actually realized. So what this means is that St. Helena is a really unique geographical and cultural place, so that the people who remain there now, and there's about 6,000 Gullah speakers left, and most of them are on this one particular island, are the heirs of all of the history Will has told you about, the particularity of St. Helena, its isolation, the development of the emancipation moment on the one hand and Field Order 15 on the other. This is a really wonderful place. This is the cottage that Martin Luther King used as his retreat. When things got tough, he went to Penn Center on St. Helena, and this was kept in reserve for him, and that's where he was able to stay. So it also has a very important political place in the history of the civil rights movement. And we were living in a little house right next door, and it's kind of thrilling to be that close to this so important part of the world.
This is our team. A good part of that team is either current Kenyon students or Kenyon graduates. And they're amazing. This one is probably the best named person in all the world, Hope Harrod, who teaches third grade in Washington, D.C. public schools, and 3 weeks ago was named the Teacher of the Year. She is amazing, and she is completely Kenyon, and she's Quaker. So there we have it. It kind of works. There are also a couple of Cypriots. There are about 8 or 12 Cleveland high school teachers, public school teachers. There's a recent grad up here who came here to play football. Didn't like the coach. And now coaches football in Savannah, Georgia. So all of this is, and here we have another. There we are. Where are other Kenyons now? That's Peter. And I seem to be taking the picture. I don't see myself. Oh, there I am. Right. Okay. Anyhow, it's an incredible group of people. The Cleveland teachers, we've been working with for about 15 years through these Department of Education grants. We got 3 of them. We got $1 million for each of them, and it was to teach north by south to these teachers, public school teachers in Cleveland, so that they could really understand what African American culture was and what its deep roots were and its cultural power. And they have been working with us to this very day, and they're some of the most dedicated and hardworking and smartest people, and they're just amazing. This one, where's this one? Up there next to me in the green shirt, he has sent about 50 Cleveland kids to Kenyon, and almost all of them graduate. So these are real good people. So our collaboration may start with students, faculty with students, administrators with faculty, but it's also with Kenyon with the rest of the world. That is, that kind of one-to-one, working with people on good things, is really an important part of what we are. And this is just an expression of it, but you can find the very same thing in the sciences, in the foreign languages, in the humanities. This is Kenyon. You can find these kinds of pictures everywhere. This is the best one. These are the best people because they're almost all historians. And really, it's hard to beat historians. Or two, this community. Or two, this community in which everybody, virtually everybody, was a landowner, which means they were not answerable to the man, and they lived on this isolated island, which meant that even the sheriff of Beaufort County couldn't come over there and enforce Jim Crow segregation or anything else. They educated their children, they ran their churches, and they made up their own laws. Until after World War II, when a bridge was built between Beaufort and Ladies Island to St. Helena. And then the state of South Carolina, facing separate but unequal pressure from the Supreme Court, decided maybe they ought to put an elementary school there, and so the kids could read and write. Well, they could already read and write. But they did. They put in a public school with white public school teachers, a bridge that would let people at will come and go, and opened this world up to our world. And one of the consequences was that their children left, got good jobs, and some of them came back, some of them didn't. A lot of them went over to Hilton, had to work. Almost all of them ended up with high school degrees, and many with college degrees. And as happens to almost every ethnic group in America, within a generation or two, we become more alike than we're different. We have different ancestors and different heritages, but we're pretty much Americans, whatever our backstories are. And this process began in earnest in 1942. So with these people, Peter and I started going to St. Helena and talked them into giving up their summers and doing interviews with the people who came of age after World War II. That is, their parents were almost uninfluenced Gullah, but they were people who were making the transition out of Gullah, and their children wouldn't even call themselves Gullah because they thought that was a word for being ignorant, stupid, and backward. And so then the third generation, as happens in most ethnic groups, loved their grandparents, found them interesting, and wanted to find out all about Gullah, and so they helped rediscover it for us. But there are people there whose parents, not their parents, but their grandparents were slaves, Gullah slaves, who sat at that emancipation tree, got land, took over their own lives, and created this incredible community that was probably the most isolated place in North America. And so they were able to sustain, after the Civil War, almost everything they had brought from Africa in 1715. 1750, okay? You can pick any one of the people we're interviewing, trace back their family, and we can trace them back to every brother, sister, uncle, aunt, cousin, grandparent, and great-grandparent, all the way back to 1715. I can't get past the Civil War with my parents. They can get back to 1715, and not only can they get back to 1715, they are literally living on the same land the first West Africans cultivated when they came to North America. That is, their continuity and their rootedness just seems almost un-American. I mean, they know who they are, where they came from, and what they believe. And this is really the power of this African-American culture that we're trying to record in the most pristine form that we can find. And pristine's not a good word, but the least anglicized form. And there are still people here, and Peter will show you a clip of some of these people who are closer to 1715 than they are to 2012. But he also has a clip of people in Cleveland that are so 20 and 12 you wouldn't believe it. But the connection between the two is so profound you're going to drop your jaw. So our archive, working with the librarians, working with technical services, has given us the means to create this digital library, which will be the largest and richest Gullah collection, period. And we will have it online, and we will have transcripts. We have students translating the Gullah into English that were tutored in Charleston by a Gullah speaker, and turning this into material that anybody can access and come and listen to these people who have very close connections with people that are very ancient in our library. And we try not to ask them loaded questions. We try to establish a conversation so that they can speak for themselves and not just tell us what we want to hear, but they can speak for themselves, so people who will listen to them 100 years from now can listen to them in their own terms, not Peter and my terms. And so that's going to be available, and it really complements a collection that the WPA did in the 1930s of the last slaves left in the United States. They collected about 5,000 interviews in the 1930s of slaves all over not slaves, but former slaves all over the United States, and they were interviewed, and those interviews were transcribed and recorded and taken to the Smithsonian, and they're the richest material we have on slavery. And that's good, because slaves were not literate for the most part. Nobody was taking records of them, and so here we again, at least the Smithsonian, is giving them their own voice, and you get to even hear the voice. But these were slaves, so these are the grandparents of the ones we're looking at. So then we have these people who, I suppose they would say, crossed the Jordan after World War II at Kenyon, and it's a far richer, better recorded, in color, with transcriptions of these people, much better than the Smithsonian stuff, but that was the 1930s. So between them, we have almost doubled what we could have had and to understand about people who weren't literate and who didn't have anybody recording them, and now they will be able to speak for themselves, and Kenyon will be in the heart of that. The Library of Congress will have one collection, and we'll have the other. But it will be accessible to everybody. In addition to that, these teachers have created a second part of the archive that's geared to teachers and students, so that select interviews will be available there, and they will have teaching plans, and students in their classrooms can access this and use it for their purposes. We have to separate them because we've placed real strict restrictions on these interviews because the people themselves don't want them to be used for nefarious white people's purposes. Okay? And they got good reason to have those feelings. So we have put very strict restrictions on them. So you have to be a very serious researcher to have access to the gold. But, I don't know, the near gold is available, and it's available to students and teachers, and they have lessons plans on how to use them to make them work when they teach American history, so American history is not such a whitewash, that it actually starts representing all of our people, and these are some of our oldest and most influential Americans. So it would be a crime not to make them a central part of an American history course. And in a couple of years, any school teacher anywhere in the world can make this part a central part of an American history course. And we think that's important. And then a second part is we will have a good bibliography there. We'll have links that they can get to other African American collections and anything else that people might want to use that will get them into their research or get them into their reading or get them into their teaching. So you come to this website and you can go anywhere, and I think it's going to be really one of the best African American websites anywhere. And the library, Peter and I, have given them permission to keep it absolutely up to date, do all the work, and don't ever call us. So we're sure they're going to do it. I think that's enough.
The secret to our success are these two women, Elfrida Thompson and Mary Legree. They are both natives of St. Helena. They lived and worked in the North. They came back to sort of reinvest themselves in their culture and to save the Praise Houses. We tried for 5 years to get inside a Praise House, and nobody was going to trust us. Not until Mary came along and said to her neighbors, it's okay. These guys are not going to steal from you. Last summer, Will and I went around the whole island and photographed 22 different small churches, which are the remnants of 22 plantations that the descendants of slaves still live by. Each then community has its own Gullah burial ground. Nina, we found one, right? Which is distinct and different from ordinary burial grounds in lots of ways, which we can tell you about later on. So there are 22 different communities on this island, each the remnant of an old plantation. So the very first time 2 years ago when we went to our first praise house, this is what we found. This is a man named Rev.
Come through looking for tickets, and he got up to an old black woman from this area here, green hair, and he called her Missy. He said, Missy, where you going, Missy? And she said, son, I was going to New York, sir. And he said, what did you say? She said, I was going to New York. And the man, see what he couldn't hear. She said, you deep in it? I just sit there and I said, oh, Lord. And he said, well, what are you going to New York for? He probably called us from New York for. She said, I went up there to see the gas chiller. I got boy chilling up there, he going up there and married high young downtown from New York. And they got gas chilling for me, and I didn't see him. Except they've been gone. So I went up there to see them. And they said, where are you from? I'm from a place called Satelna. They ain't been no St. Helena or St. Helena. Satelna. I've been from Satelna Island. You didn't hear about that place? And the man said, I don't understand what you're saying. I can understand everything she's saying. But she said, I'm from a place called Bravo Plantation. You didn't hear about that place, did it? And the man still with you. He just followed on. He said, and I just sit there and I said, Lord, have mercy. I said, you should have asked me what she said. Tell me what she said. But the praise house, I believe, I call it the boot camp of our church. I believe this is where our people learn how to do everything. They learn how to raise their line to come be the hymn. They had to learn how to line those hymns the right way. Father, I stretch my hand to you, no other help I know. If thou would draw thyself from me, all whither shall I go? What did thou on this sudden door before I drew my breath? What pain, what labor to secure my soul from an endless death. Stepping back, hymn number, we ask somebody for a proper tune at this time, and then now they tell a deacon, a person who is empty on the deacon board, if you don't know how, don't have the tune for the hymn, don't line the hymn. Because if you call it out, and the members in the congregation don't know it, and you don't know it, it's an embarrassing situation. And then some of them might know it and don't do it anyhow because they want to put you on a pedestal to see what they can talk about when they get home. Because see, all people can talk about things under the tree, on the porch, and we the only people in the world I know that can talk without moving your mouth. Okay?
We the only people who can talk without moving we mouth. And the Gullah call themselves we people. And you heard the reference to the tree and to lining out, which is the old tradition of teaching songs by the Pete Seeger method of throwing a line out and it's repeated as part of call and response, but it's the way you taught congregations who weren't reading how to sing. So this was about the very first interview we did, and it's typical of that are now, we already have about 150 hours collected in this Gullah Digital Archive. But this next piece, at least, knocked me out, because after we interviewed Rev, this is what happened. should have heard these three things: polyrhythm, call and response, and the use of all limbs. And that's not hearing. But what made the ring shout unique from West Africa as it came to the New World was the notion that it wasn't a dance because you didn't cross your legs. And it was always done in a counterclockwise fashion. But when you took the ring shout into the church, and you're limited by seats and pews, then it's in a sense a dance that's being done in a stationary form, but it's still the ring shout with all of the ring shout characteristics. And I took that small piece of video because I wanted to do the feet. And so it's a whole this interesting combination of sort of tap dancing and drumming and multi-rhythm, all part of the heritage of West African culture. Now this is what the ring shout comes from. Again, call and response, polyrhythm, no crossing the feet. This was at a Presbyterian outdoor healing service in Ghana, which has been reinvested with American Pentecostalism, which itself is, of course, the result of the West African culture that's been growing within the Gullah world all these numbers of years. So in a certain sense, West African Presbyterianism, they have these priests with purple collars laying their hands on people, and the people you saw dancing are getting ready to go up to the stage to have their foreheads held so that they'll fall over and be healed. But you can certainly see, as we can, there are amazing similarities. The next and last clip is from a Pentecostal church in Cleveland, Ohio, where one of our Cleveland public school teachers took us for a day because her mother is also the minister. And this is the equivalent of a storefront church. It's a tiny little place, about a third of the size of this room. Now for the grand finale.
As I was watching those devout Presbyterians do the ring shout in Ghana, I think there's something to be said there, and that is traditionally we've seen Christianity going to Africa as making Africans Europeans. What do you think John Calvin would have thought about that? I think he would have thought that James Brown had had more of an impact than he did. And I know our African historian writes about these kinds of things. When he looks at Christian missionaries in Africa, he can see how the Africans are altering that Christianity to make it work for them, just like the Gullah took their West African ways and their English contacts and the slave experience and made it their own, something that is still relevant to us today. In some ways, the grand climax is just a thank you again, but also to point out what is, I think, happening at Kenyon, and it's a process that's, I would date it for about 10 years, and that is, at Kenyon, various groups of faculty and students are starting to get together to do very interesting things in which faculty research and student learning are no longer one's here and one's there. But rather they're overlapping in very profound ways where the students are contributing to faculty insights and the faculty are contributing to student insights, and then there's this other thing that's produced that just has an impact on the community. And we're starting to do this in a number of ways. For instance, Peter discovered this incredible boxer in Beaufort, but he was born on St. Helena. And he won the Senior Golden Gloves Championship about 25 years ago, which means that at that moment, he was probably the most promising light heavyweight in the country and certainly was ready to win gold medals. He went pro, and he went and trained with Joe Frazier in Philadelphia, who is from St. Helena. And he worked with Joe Frazier for a couple of years. He won, what, 19? 17 consecutive fights. He wasn't defeated. Light heavyweight. And he was just about ready to be the prime contender. And in the match, that last match, that 17th match, he got hit in the eye and his retina was disconnected, and they wouldn't let him box again. And so he went back to Beaufort, and he's kind of, I don't know if you've read the book, well, it doesn't matter. The Natural. He is kind of like the Natural, a baseball player that almost was the greatest baseball player in the world, and then it ended. So he went back to Beaufort, and in a real sense, his life has been a neutral sense. He's a proud person. He's proud of what he's done. He hasn't gone into booze or drugs. And he's a very, very nice person. He's very articulate, but like Muhammad Ali, he speaks very slowly, which I think is probably a consequence of the boxing. But it's very articulate, and it's very logical, and he can answer questions very well. It just takes him, 3 times longer than me to answer a question. And I answer them pretty slow because I'm from Charleston. But as Peter and I tend to do, we always try to make a molehill out of a mountain. A mountain out of a molehill?
I think so.
A mountain out of a molehill. I have to have him help me. And so immediately we said, documentary. And so we came back to Kenyon, and we talked to people about it, really not even ask them anything. And the people in technical services, the people in the public affairs office, the people in the gun gallery, all said, that's exactly what we want to do. Let's make a documentary here at Kenyon using our state-of-the-art technology, using our staff, our students, and do something that some faculty member has discovered. And do that, and it could be really good. And this is one of the few times that Peter and I were not the people who were building castles in the sky. These were other people. Their staff, their other faculty, their students. It's just amazing. And then they start talking to each other and they're thinking, oh, we can do yours for Charles Singleton. We'll start out with a boxer. It's always good to start out with a boxer. But then other faculty will have other projects they've discovered that they would also want to do documentaries on. And we can have a series of these Kenyon documentaries, which if you think about it is kind of the equivalent of a multidisciplinary Kenyon review that's up to date in 21st century. Not that the other isn't. But the power of the Kenyon Review was that John Ransom came to this very insignificant college in this very isolated place, and he created the most important literary review in the country. He used his ideas to work out a way of teaching literature at Kenyon that was different than any place else, and his textbooks and Robert Penn Warren's textbooks on how to teach English became the American way to teach English. It's not the way they teach it now, but for 30 or 40 years, Kenyon was American literature. And some of the best ideas, some of the best essays that were written in literature were published in the Kenyon Review. Well, you think about it, you say, whoa, where does this stuff come? This is a dippy little place. And yet, whoosh, diamonds in our backyard. Well, if they can do it in the English department, we should be able to do it all over the college, and we have the talent and the ambitions and the dreams and the students and the faculty to do it. And so we may start with the documentary series now. We may have this unique series. Who can tell? But the thing is, if the English department can create and sponsor what is one of the most important scholarly journals anywhere, the rest of us should be able to do it too. And then that takes the Kenyon story outside, which I think is what this unique is about. It's Kenyon taking the best of what we have here and not sticking it in our pockets and sitting on it. It's putting it in a format and in a way and using our unique resources that are interdisciplinary that you can't tell an administrator from a faculty member, a young faculty member from a student. It's what Kenyon is perfectly suited to do, and the Kenyon Review has proved that it can be done at the very best level. And so I think we're at this moment, and it's developed over the last 10 years, where we're going to see a lot of these things emerging from every part of the college, and that we're going to be a rich center of ideas and insights to a very broad audience that goes well beyond Knox County. We don't have to be the second best college in Knox County. We can really be good, and that's our ambition. I'll just say one thing about the Gullah. Okay, they preserved it, they created it, and they did it in the rice lands. In 1807, the international slave trade ended, which meant that there would be no more African slaves brought to North America, so the rich primary influence of West Africa was over. West Africa would be transmitted to other Americans through Gullah people. So in 1793, 14 years earlier, is that right? Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin, which meant that short staple cotton, which wasn't tropical, could be grown in North America and could feed the textile mills of England and the United States. So cotton took off westward at the same time that the labor force has been cut off at the knees. So the only labor you're going to get to work for nothing and work all day in the southern sun are going to be slaves that are already here. 40% of those were Gullah. Another 40% were Virginians. The Virginia slaves were largely taken to the Upper South, Tennessee, Kentucky. The Gullah slaves are who defined the Lower South. So North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Northern Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, Arkansas. The Lower South, the red states. Okay? A lot of the things, and I hope this makes you think about it, because there are a lot of people that are very bigoted towards Southerners. But much of what we identify as the Lower South, the very South, in some people's minds, the very heart of darkness, the reason that it's different than the Upper South is its very rich West African influences. And so some of our judgments of the Lower South are consequence not just that they're racial bigots if they're white, but we also put down this rich West African culture that we associated with ignorance and backwardness. A lot of it isn't. A lot of it is incredibly rich and powerful. And it comes from these people. And then, as Peter and I have written about, after World War I, half of these people in the South went north, migrated north, settled in the central cities, created their own southern communities in South Chicago, Harlem, South Central LA, and introduced all of these people of European ancestry who got no rhythm, who are completely uncool, who eat the dullest food you can possibly imagine, have the worst taste in music, dress like, I don't know, some artificial Cambridge, Oxford person, and introduced to America what it was to be cool, which is a Yoruba word. And there's nothing better than being cool. And it's what non-Americans like most about America. They like our popular culture. And this popular culture, 2 steps removed, is St. Helena's gift to America. It is what makes us cool Americans rather than, you know.